Facebook, YouTube, and on Zoom. Speaking of which, Radhika Raman Prabhu commented recently as this morning, how much appreciation he has for the broadcast team. He had said to a reliable source here at ISV that he appreciates coming here because there are many places, obviously, that want him to come around the world. And he's very much occupied with his research and teaching in Utah. He'd like to go everywhere, but he feels that when he comes here, because of the efficiency of broadcasting and the presentation, he's able to reach many audiences around the world. And I know that to be true. I alluded to it earlier. People have mentioned to me that the reason they tune into ISV is that because Radhika Raman Prabhu comes here. They get hooked. And then they say, well, if you invite him to your program, you guys must be okay. So our thanks to the broadcast team, headed by Ramananda Saka Prabhu, who's... and now if you're just joining us for the program, we have with us His Grace Radhika Raman Prabhu, scholar extraordinaire, a devotee extraordinaire, and he's speaking on spiritual solutions to modern problems. And this is part 2.2. Hare Krishna. Please welcome again His Grace Radhika Raman.
Okay, so welcome back. I hope you had nice prasad. And since sessions after prasad are always challenging, for the next 4 points, the next 4 building blocks of engaged Vaishnavism, I have a story to go with each one. So hopefully it'll keep us awake. I just wanted to say one thing I forgot at the beginning, the very beginning actually, which is when Prabhupada gives his engaged Vaishnava theology and the preface of Srimad Bhagavatam, there is, he describes the current situation, he describes several challenges and issues that we pointed out that he's addressing, and then he names, of all the different audiences, there's one audience that he names specifically as an audience that Srimad Bhagavatam is meant for. And that audience is colleges and universities. And I mention this because not only is the question of engagement something that is so relevant to students today, but just to make it a little bit more personal, I think this is very important for our children. As our children go into college and into university, one of the most important questions they are faced with is this: what do we have to say about the issues of our times? Whatever that current issue may be, whether it was, medical ethics or euthanasia or AI or the current wars in the world, right? What do you have to say about that? And that's a question I think that we have a responsibility to help them articulate answers to. If they are going to be Vaishnav in this world as they go about their educations in whatever field they plan to go in, and as they then go on to work in whatever field they want to. So just to highlight that fact, the colleges and universities audience is one Prabhupada specifically calls out in terms of engagement with the world. And that's true not just as a source of what are they interested in, but also as a resource for our own children and their concerns and that they're going to be asked as they try to be Vaishnav in this world. Okay, so I forgot that little thing, so I wanted to add to it now. And then let's move through our 8 building blocks. The world is a miserable place. Avatar theology. The world is non-different from God. Okay, so the world is non-different from the Lord because it's His Shakti, His energy. God is personal, and therefore He really does understand who we are and what we're going to. When the demigods come to Him with Hiranyakashipu is terrorizing the world, the Lord says, Gnatam evam doratmyam. I understand what you're going through. I understand what Hiranyakashipu is doing. Right? So He's very personal and present to this world. So if the world is non-different from God and God is personal, then the thing that follows directly from that is the idea that the world itself is a personal place. And now we come to a building block that I think is directly relevant to questions of environment and ecology. The world is a personal place. What does this mean? From a Vaishnav perspective, everything in this world is personal. The sun and the moon, the stars, the earth, the wind, the rivers, the mountains, the trees, the ocean, everything is a person. And this is one of the things that emerges most clearly when you study Srimad Bhagavatam from the perspective of the environment, of ecology. You find that everywhere you look, Krishna is dealing with the world in personal ways, but also the world is dealing with us in personal ways also. Nothing is merely a force, merely an energy, merely a property. Everything, there's a person behind it. The sun god, the moon god, the Lord of the oceans, right? All of these are persons. And even as it's difficult sometimes in this modern world of ours, in this mechanistic world of ours, to digest that. Oh, this is embarrassing. This is like, full of mythology and full of stories, and there's gods emerging from everywhere and deities and different personalities. What it's actually pointing to is something that our world really, really desperately needs at this point, which is a personalized understanding of the world. Because when you see something as a person, then it's no longer a resource. A resource is something you can use, you can mine, you can exploit, and destroy if you like, because it's for you. You have control over it. But when something is a person, then the natural human response to that is a relationship. It may be a contentious relationship. You may have an argument, but it's still a relationship. There's still 2 individuals involved. And Vaishnavas put a face on everything. On trees, on rivers, on mountains, Ganga, Yamuna, Narmada, Saraswati, every ocean, these are all personalities. So many trees in India have a face on them. You've seen this in villages? They'll put a face on it. In fact, there's one professor, one scholar who's recently retired as professor of religious studies at the University of Indiana, Bloomington, a good friend as well, David Haberman. And wonderful person, a real Vaishnav at heart. And he's written these series of books on what can be described as a personal understanding, a Vaishnav personal understanding of the world. One on the river Yamuna, a river of love in the age of pollution. One, a book on trees called People Trees, which is a pun, because people, he spells like the English word, these are people. But also people is a type of tree in India that is often regarded as a person, right? People trees. And this was on tree worship in India. And then a third one recently called loving stones, which is on the worship of Giriraj, where in that instance we take a stone and we paint a face on it. We understand that stone as being personal, as being Krishna himself. One of the things he describes in his book, People Trees, he says that as he traveled the length and breadth of India, asking people about the trees that they decorate and worship and look to for refuge. Everywhere he went, he asked people the same question in Hindi. Ye vriksh kaun hai? Who is this tree? Who is this tree? And not once, he said, in all my travels, did anyone look at him and go, what? You mean, what is this tree? Are you asking what type of tree this is? Not once. Everyone had an answer. Oh, this is this Devi, or this is this demigoddess, this is this deity, or this is a sacred tree of this kind who protects us in our village. Who is this tree? We might ask that question of anything in this world. Who is this rock? Who is this river? Who is this mountain? Because that's our understanding of the world. And Haberman makes another very important point in his conclusion to two of these books, Loving Stones and People Trees. He says, there are two ways in which we might approach this world. One is called anthropocentrism, and the other is called anthropomorphism. Now, let me explain these words. They're very important. Anthropocentrism, well, the other one, let's start. Anthropomorphism is the idea that everything in this world is human-like, that we see a face, a personality, a person inside, within, behind everything, or whatever we look at, anthropomorphism. And through much of modern history, particularly the colonial history, and particularly missionary attempts in India and elsewhere in the world, anthropomorphism has been seen as the marker of a savage, of someone who is undeveloped. The heathen in his blindness bows down to wood and stone, one Anglican hymn says. This was an uncivilized society, and they existed all over the world from the colonial perspective, not just in India, but in native indigenous cultures all around the world, where people, things, trees, ideas are seen as persons, as spirits, the Great Spirit. And that primitive idea needed to be purified and elevated, civilized to what? Anthropocentrism. The idea that we, human beings, are the center of all creation, that everything exists for our pleasure and use, that we rule over them. It's our dominion. And Haberman says it is that idea of anthropocentrism that still saddles us today, which has led to so many problems and challenges and exploitation. Because what it does is it objectifies people and things and persons and everything around us, that these are resources, which sounds like a really nice word. But in fact, what it does is it's objectifying. It's saying, I have a right to mine you because you're a consumer unit for my use, my pleasure. This is a thing for me to use because I, the human being, are at the center of creation. And Haberman says, perhaps it's time that we seriously take, again, the idea of anthropomorphism. Not as primitivism, not as mythology, not as a savage understanding of the world that science has moved us beyond. but perhaps a reality that we need to recover again, where we see the person in not just all humans, but in all animals, and not just in all animals, but in plants, and even in rocks, even in stones. How many times does Srila Prabhupada point out the hypocrisy of humanitarian work because of the first part of that word, human? Why just human? Why not all of God's creations? He says this over and over again in his purports, in his writings, in his lectures. In order to use or exploit anything, the first thing we have to do is depersonalize them. This is true. This has been shown many times in regard to studies on meat eating. The only way you can eat the meat, the flesh of another living being, is when you see them not as a person. So, in college, in my world religions class, for example, when we have a section on Jainism, which is a world religion that highly values ahimsa, nonviolence, and especially vegetarianism as a result. And in that section, we talk about what drives a vegetarian perspective. And it's not just health and it's not just environment, even though those are very valuable outlets or side effects, elements of vegetarianism. I asked them, what would it feel like for you to think of someone slaughtering their dog for dinner? And the response is universally abhorrent, because in our culture, dogs and cats, we put faces on them. We personalize them. Whereas when it comes to other sorts of animals, we don't speak of them as animals. We speak of various parts, various cuts of meat that separate the animal, the cow, from the various parts of his body. Anytime, if we need to go to war with another society, the first thing the soldiers need to do is to depersonalize them, to see them as evil or demonic or machines. And any successful act of violence will involve that process. Gendered violence against women, same thing. You have to be able to objectify them first before you commit violence towards them. And one of the biggest tools that we have to avoid that is present in our philosophy. We have one of the most deeply, radically personal philosophies that exists in the world. And it has a very powerful result. Not only is God a person, but everything in this creation is personal. And when we recover that personalization, then we're forced to enter into a relationship with that. There's a wonderful story in Srimad Bhagavatam about this, which is that of the Prachetas, the brothers, when they were asked to rule the world, to populate the world, to rule it. Then the first thing they did is, we have to qualify ourselves. And we'll come to that as one of the pillars of engagement very soon. But to engage with the world, they needed to prepare themselves. So they went into the water and they meditated. I forget now, 1,000 years, something like that. 10,000. They meditated for a long time. And when they emerged from the water, they ready to civilize, to rule, to create a human community. What did they find? But everything was overrun by trees. They had overgrown everywhere. Their roots and branches and everything, leaving not one place for human habitation. So this was a problem. And they needed to cut down trees. But they got so angry at the trees' proliferation that they started to shoot fire from their eyes and burn all the trees with the goal of ridding this world of its trees. Prabhupada says in one purport, this is in the story of Hiranyakashipu, he says, Hiranyakashipu, I think, terrorizes the universe, that chapter. He says, cutting down a tree is the greatest sinful activity. And he criticizes specifically the proliferation of all kinds of junk publications that expire within the space of a day in their interest, and people throw them out as such a harm to trees. And then specifically contrast the publishing of his books as the other possibility, right? But he says, cutting down trees is the greatest sinful activity. And in fact, this is an aside, when you look at the stories of all the demons in Srimad Bhagavatam, there's one quality that they have in common. There's many qualities, but one in particular I want to highlight, which is that all of them devastate the natural environment in which they live. And when you see the stories of Krishna's incarnations in Bhagavatam, there's one effect that he always has, which is that the natural environment becomes joyful and happy and flourishing. Hiranyakashipu not only systematically kills devotees and rishis and sages, he systematically destroys the natural environment, cutting down trees and rivers and mountains and just causing everything. And when Krishna appears, you remember his advent in Krishna book, right? All the land and waters and everything is lush and happy and friendly. And Krishna, throughout his childhood, he's protecting the natural environment of Vrindavan. Whether it's Talavan from misuse, or it's the forest fire's destruction, or it's the pollution that Kaliya causes in the river Yamuna. In fact, the story of Kaliya is very useful to Vaishnavas today in Braj, who tell us that, look, 5,000 years ago, Kaliya with his many hoods, his poisonous breath was polluting the waters of the Yamuna, and Krishna drove him away. So Kaliya's back today. And those hoods have been replaced with the multiple pipes of raw sewage that flow into the Ganga, into the Yamuna, and so on. Similarly, creating a toxic environment that is harming humans, animals, trees, plants. So you see this pattern. If you study Srimad Bhagavatam from the perspective of ecology or environment, which I encourage you to do, it's quite an illuminating experience. You see that even as Krishna is coming to establish Dharma, part of that is the kingship I was talking about. Part of that is a positive natural environment, all with the goal of leading people back home, back to Godhead. So back to the prachetas. So they're burning the trees down, right? These trees are in our way. We need to get rid of them. Every last tree. And then Lord Brahma appears. And he says, whoa, wait. This is too much. Yes, you need to create space to live. But every tree? Please stop. And he explains to them, and of course they are cultured and respectful enough that they're willing to obey Brahmaji just because Lord Brahma said it. But Lord Brahma doesn't leave it at that. To ensure that they never cut down trees or burn trees gratuitously again, like they're doing, he asks the forest, the trees themselves, to give their daughter, Marisha, in marriage to the Prachetas. What's happened now? It's gone from being merely a philosophical point to a personal one. Now you can't cut the trees down, not just because they're other living entities, et cetera, but because they're your father-in-law. And it's a whole different picture. This is why trees end up growing out of the middle of houses in India. Is because someone had a relationship with that tree and couldn't bear the thought of cutting it down to make a house. This personalization extends throughout the world, throughout our philosophy. And it really provides us an opportunity in situations of environment destruction, in situations of conflict and war, in situations of interpersonal violence, to say, wait, how can we personalize this situation? Even in the polarization that we find in political systems, to ask ourselves, how can we personalize the person I disagree with? How can I see them as a person? Because if Krishna is a person, and this world is Krishna's energy, then everything in this world is personal. Okay. Oops. Now, we're going to move. So far, these first 5 have been very global in nature. I mean to say, they're talking about big picture things, how we approach the world and engage with it and so on, how we see the world. Now let's move more to the individual. What are the individual elements? What are the elements of our philosophy that provide us a basis for our individual practice of engagement? Perhaps the most important thing that needs to be said is that engagement begins with a transformation of our own character. If we look at the 26 qualities of a devotee, if we look at any of the most important qualities of a devotee, especially those laid out by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in Shikshashtaka, they all deal with our relationship with others. Para dukkha dukhi. Prabhupada says this many places as being one of the most important qualities of a Vaishnava. Essentially a statement of empathy. The ability to suffer when others are suffering and to feel happiness at the happiness of others. In fact, Krishna uses this very idea when he speaks in Bhagavad Gita in the 4 essential verses in chapter 10. He says, Tesham evanukampartham aham ajnana jamtama nashayam yatma bhavasto jnana deepena bhasvata. He says, for my devotees, I show them the path by which they can come to me. I light the lamp of knowledge. Why? Tesham eva anukampartham. Anukampa in Sanskrit, kampa means to tremble. And anu means with or after. To tremble with someone, to tremble after them, is the very definition of compassion, of mercy. When someone is trembling out of joy, then you tremble with them. And when someone is trembling out of misery, then you tremble with them. So engagement begins with a cultivation of one's own character. And there's this area of study that's growing in the academic world called peace studies, which aims to figure out what are the various components of interpersonal relationships, social relationships, and global relationships that lead to peace, individually, socially, and globally. And that literature agrees that there will be no outer peace without inner peace. And in a world that is struggling so much with mental health challenges, this is something we really have to contribute. In universities now, close to 40% of students have a diagnosable mental health challenge. And of those, I don't know how many exactly, 25 to 30% have a chronic mental health challenge. We live in a world where this is a real challenge, and it is not just out there, but even amongst us, because the world is a place of so much anxiety. Our ability to find that inner peace through the cultivation of a Vaishnava character, that's something the world needs to hear, and something we need to model in the world as well. Back to the story of Mrigari. You know, when Mrigari first when Narada Muni first sees those animals with half-broken bones, he feels so much pain at their suffering that he leaves the path to go find the person who did it. Why does he go look for the source of that pain? What's he going to get from it? Are those animals going to become his disciples? Not in this life, right? Are they going to give him some dakshina? No. Are they going to speak philosophy with them? No. Those animals, by their very situation, are the emblem of someone who needs something but has no capacity to give back. And Narada Muni's decision to help them is the exemplar of compassion. Because compassion, to the extent that we get something back for it, is mitigated, right? There's maybe some compassion there mixed with a little bit of desire for some gain. So I want to help this person, but also I want to be well known in society as someone who is compassionate, or I want to be seen as giving charity. So it can be mixed, right? Mode of passion mixes the mode of goodness. It dilutes what we want to do. But there in that forest, there's no one watching. Those animals have no capacity and never will in this life to reciprocate. And so Narada Muni could just as well keep walking. But the fact that he chooses to leave the path to find them, that's the exemplar of compassion. That's more or less its definition. This is the textbook case. And leaving the path in a forest is a risky act. There's a number of things that could go wrong in a jungle. One, you might lose your way. You can get lost. The path is the only thing that protects you from not getting lost in a vast jungle. And at that time, India had vast jungles. Right? This is the area around Prayag, Allahabad. The Ganges plain, the Yamuna plain is one of the most fertile, richest regions in the world. And the forests at the time were lush and packed. You can lose your way. Of course, he's Narada Muni, I understand. But for the purpose of analogy, right? Leaving the path is not an easy thing. You can lose your way, but what else can happen? You're dealing with a hunter here. And what do hunters shoot at? Anything that moves in the leaves. You know, I live in Utah, which is a hunting country. And there are two types of trails. We love to hike. There's two types of trails there. One kind is where humans and bikers are welcome to hike. And the other kind is for hunters. And you have to watch the signs. And one time in our desire to explore and find new trails, we ended up going down a canyon and stopping at what looked like a very beautiful spot, not reading the sign, and kept walking on the trail. And pretty soon, poof, poof, and we freaked out and we ran back to the car. And sure enough, there was a sign there that says, "Warning hunters." Leaving the path in a jungle is not a smart idea. And yet Narada Muni took that risk only because of compassion. In fact, when Mrigari meets him for the first time, you know the first thing he tells him? He says, "Why did you leave the path? You just scared away all the animals I was trying to shoot. Look, I've got my job, you've got yours. Stay in your lane." Isn't that what we're asked to do? Stay in your lane. Go to work, get a job, get an education, get a job, buy a house, raise a family, water your lawn, and die. Right? That's our story. That's our trajectory. And then a Vaishnav comes along and messes that all up by saying, actually, you're heading into a ditch, and I care about you. And this matters. And so I'm going to take a risk. I'm not going to stay in my lane. Imagine if Srila Prabhupada had stayed in his lane. What's the lane for sadhus in India? Vrindavan. You're comfortable there. You're always going to get good meals whenever you want it. You're going to be comfortable. People are going to know how to respect you. And he leaves his lane. He leaves the path, strikes out into a jungle, and shows up here in a place which is not good for him in any way. It's not getting him prestige. In fact, people back home are criticizing him for leaving the lane. It's not getting him wealth. He's penniless as he struggles and then robbed in New York City. It's not getting him a ton of disciples. He's living with drug addicts and bums. Initially, there's nothing for him to gain, just as there was nothing for Narada Muni to gain. Vaishnavas throughout history have not stayed in their lane. This is why we go out to distribute books, to teach, and to engage with the world. It's a risk, and it's much easier to just go on with our life, doing what we normally do, which is economic development and some religion connected with it. We run our families, and we make money, and once, twice a week, we come to the temple, and we ensure that things are good with God also. And now I'm in my lane, and everything's comfortable there. But when we're asked to leave the lane, that's the heart of what engagement means. That's engaged Vaishnavism. When we look at a person and we say, I don't care what I'm going to get from this person. What I'm concerned about is this person and what they need. Because they're a living entity and they're a person and they're suffering. So engagement begins with a transformation of character. There is no possibility of doing any of the other things we described unless that character is cultivated in the heart of a devotee. And so devotees then upgrade the standard moral qualities that the world says are good. Everyone says that dharma is good. This is a largely universal element. Do your dharma, do your duty. Hindus say it, Buddhists say it, Jains say it, Sikhs say it, and people of all different religions can appreciate that idea. Do your dharma, do your duty. And Vaishnavas say, dharma is good, but it's not enough. I'm not only going to do my dharma, I'm going to do seva. I'm going to do service. Because dharma you can do to be righteous. Service you do because you want to help someone. Because you want to give yourself to someone. Everyone can get behind ahimsa or nonviolence. Don't harm other people. That's a universal ethic. Vaishnavas say, yes, ahimsa is good, but we want to go a step above, beyond ahimsa to karuna, to compassion. Because I can be nonviolent by staying in my room all day, but I can't be compassionate by doing that. So, if we look at the qualities of a Vaishnava from the perspective of engagement, we find a whole mine, a world of treasure house of different elements that are so useful in cultivating our own character and in helping others to recognize what is often missing in situations of conflict or difficulty. Okay. 7. Detachment, vairagya. So if you recall back at the beginning, the first part of the seminar, I said this was one of those areas that is criticized as being antithetical to engagement. You want to detach from the world. Why should you engage with it? But here's the amazing thing. Detachment when applied in a Vaishnav sense, actually propels us to engagement. And here's why. Because as we understand from Bhagavad Gita, the person who is the best situated, in the best position to help the world, is the one who is detached from it. The person who is best situated to help the world is the one who is detached from it. Not detached in the sense of, I don't care. That's indifference. And indifference is not renunciation. Some people confuse renunciation with indifference. They think that renunciation means that I'm just going to walk away and I don't care. But that's not how Vaishnavas understand renunciation. Even the practice of sannyas, the ultimate step of renunciation, is done only for the purpose of greater engagement. This is why we Gaudiya Vaishnavas speak not just about detachment, vairagya, but yukta vairagya. That's our modification of a stereotypical notion of renunciation. When we say, it's not just detachment, but yukta detachment. This word yukta is very special. On one level, it just means proper or good. So proper detachment is when we don't reject things, we use it in the service of Krishna. But yukta also comes from the root yuj, which is the same root as yoga, which means to connect, to unite, or to engage. Yuktasya bhaktams chaniyunjatopi vande guru shri charanarvindam. I offer my humble obeisances to the spiritual master who is always engaging the Vaishnavas, the devotees, in serving the Lord. Shri Vigrahara Dhara Nityanana Shringara Tanman Diramarjanado, in cleansing the temple. Yuktasya bhaktam shani. So this word yukta means engagement. So yukta vairagya, where does this term engaged Vaishnavism come from? There it is. Right? Yukta vairagya means engaged detachment, which is of course an oxymoron. It's a paradox, which is why it's so powerful. Because it points out that the only reason for detachment is engagement, and the only evidence that you are detached is that you can engage with the world in a selfless way. I think one of the nicest examples of this, the ability of the power of detachment to change the world, not of indifference, but of detachment, I think is in the story of Prahlad Maharaj. You see, Prahlad Maharaj, on one level, he looks like a very passive person. His father's trying to kill him in different ways, and he's not standing up to fight with his father. He never pulls out a sword. But Prahlad Maharaj is doing something even more powerful than pulling out a sword. You see, he grew up in a family situation that was really difficult. It was the primary urge, the primary emotion that was driving his family, his father particularly, was revenge. His brother, Hiranyaksha, had been killed by Lord Vishnu. And ever since that time, Hiranyakashipu had one goal in mind, which is to get revenge. To do the same thing to Lord Vishnu as he did to his brother. For that reason, he meditated, that intense austerity. For that reason, he fought with Prahlad and tried to kill him. For that reason, he tried to re-educate him, right? It was that, and you could just imagine conversations at the dinner table, right? It was driving everything in that family. The rage that Hiranyakashipu demonstrates in Bhagavatam is all driven by that fear of revenge, that desire for revenge. And imagine in that scenario, your son comes to you after school, sits on your lap, and his father says, "What did you learn?" And he says, "Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu Smaranam." Hiranyakashipu's reaction actually looks kind of normal, from this perspective. He's like, he gets angry, he pushes his son off. Look at what Prahlad's doing. I'm sure he knows. This is like the family conversation that all together we're going to kill the person who killed your uncle. And he shows up and says, our duty is to love and worship him. When Hiranyakashipu develops animosity towards him, when he gives up on him, he tries to re-educate him, he tries to reform him in so many ways. When he finally gives up on him and tries to kill him repeatedly, every time his father asks him, why are you doing this? Where are you getting your power from? Why are you worshiping my enemy? His consistent answer is, there is no friend and there is no enemy in this world. That is a construction of your mind. This is essentially detachment, right? He's describing what detachment is. And the very person who you think is my friend and empowering me, he's your friend too. This category of friend and enemy doesn't work. And that's what makes Hiranyakashipu even angrier. Had Prahlad pulled out his sword and said, oh yeah, you want to kill me? Well, I'm going to fight you. That would have made total sense to Hiranyakashipu. Yeah, okay. So I've got an enemy and this is his partner, his minion. And so he's fighting me and I will fight him. Because Hiranyakashipu's entire world was divided into friends and enemies, that reaction, that so-called resistance from Prahlad would have made total sense to him. He wouldn't have liked it, but it would have been, he wouldn't have lost sleep over it. What drives Hiranyakashipu up the wall, what makes him miserable, is the fact that his son refuses to say that you're my enemy, that I hate you, Father. That's what drives him crazy. And that's what the power of detachment is. It's not indifference. I don't care about you, Father. No, he never says that. To the contrary, he tells him over and over again that there's still opportunity to stop this from happening, Father. You can still do this. He's trying to instruct him multiple occasions. He's detached. And that detachment gives him a power, gives him the ability to speak truth to power in a way that few people have. As a 5-year-old boy against the most powerful man in the universe, what even the demigods quake in front of him and cannot speak up, this boy can speak truth to power because he's detached. He has nothing to lose. And we see the same thing with the story of Dadichi Muni in Bhagavatam. In the story of Vritrasura, when the demigods are trying to find a way to kill Vritra, and the Lord says, you need a special weapon, and that, the thunderbolt, and that weapon can only be built with something that is very, very strong, and the only thing strong enough are the bones of this sage named Dadichi. And they go to Dadichi Muni and say, we need your bones, which means give up your life for us. And Dadichi Muni spends a little time teasing them. He says, oh, I don't want to do that. My life is dear to me like yours is to you. And how can I serve anyone if I give up my body? And the demigods get more and more riled up. And Dadichi Muni is enjoying this. And eventually he comes out and he says, look, I was just questioning, testing, teasing. My life is, this body is only given to us by others. It's made for the welfare of others. So no problem. Take my bones. I'll get another body. The only reason he's able to do that immense act of detachment, engagement, of helping others, of welfare for others, is because he's detached. So detachment, renunciation, these are actually very powerful tools for engagement. And this is Krishna's foundational point in the first few chapters of the Gita, right? That you engage while you're detached from the fruits of your action. Okay. Whoops. Then, the very last one. One of the biggest challenges when it comes to karma for engagement is this idea that karma basically determines what our future is going to be anyway. Therefore, why try? Why do anything? It can be even worse than that. That's probably the most benign way of taking it. When I teach the idea of karma in my classes, that everything you experience is a result of your past. When I put it like that, what's the first question you think people come up with? Maybe it's not the first, but it always shows up every single time. Someone raises their hand and says, are you saying that people deserve to suffer? Are you saying that that blind person deserves to be blind? And the person who's in pain deserves to be in pain? Are you blaming the victim? The answer to that question has to be no. But how? Why? Why is it not blaming the victim? Okay, so there's two sides to karma. Karma foundationally means action. It secondarily means reaction, what we get for our actions. The first one, action, is the very basis for why we should do anything, is because through that action, we have the capacity to shape our future and to shape the future of those who are affected by us. That's action in the sense of karmanyeva adhikaraste. Act in this world as your duty, because that's what you're meant to do. And then there's the other side of action, of karma, which is what bounces back from that activity, which is why we're here at the moment. One prompts action, and the other prompts resignation. Or to put it in a more positive way, contentment or acceptance with where we're at. There are times in life when each one of these sides is useful. There are times when we need to act to change a situation, to make it better. And there are times when we have to accept the situation we are in that cannot be changed. That decision is up to us, and hopefully in the counsel of other devotees who can guide us in terms of what kind of response is appropriate in a given situation. Should I act to change something? Should, in Arjuna's case, fight to change something? Or should I resign myself to the way things are? Sometimes when we resign, we get a lot of peace as a result of that, to accept what we have received. This is my toolkit. This is what Krishna has given me. Right? I was never meant to do this. That's not something I'm going to do. I have a friend who is older, and he says people in their youth have their bucket lists where they're like, I got to do this, I got to do that, I got to do this. He said, at my age, I have a chuck-it list, which is all the things that I'm never going to do. It's not going to happen, right? And if I'm going to die a peaceful man, then I need to empty out that. I need to empty out my bucket list. Right? I need to get rid of all of those things so I can die peacefully. Why have a list of things you're never going to do, right? So there are times when resignation is good. It's appropriate. But here's the thing. When it comes to other people, we have no right to apply the second one. It's only the first. We can act in such a way to help them, and we can encourage them to act in a way that helps themselves, to improve their life. rather than telling someone, that's your karma, so suck it up. Maybe someone who has a real relationship of trust with them. Maybe a parent or a child or a true friend or a spiritual master or someone who is acknowledged from both sides as having that kind of relationship can tell them, I think you need to make peace with this circumstance. This is part of your past and it won't go away. But beyond that very trusting relationship, our responsibility when we encounter suffering is to use the first side. And again, if we go back to the story of Mrigari and Narada Muni, when Narada Muni introduces the idea of karma to Mrigari, he shows him the future that he is creating for himself. By doing this, look at what's coming to you. Look at what you're doing for your future. And you have the ability to stop that by acting in a more compassionate way. What he doesn't tell Mrigari is, look at you, what a sorry state you're in, what you must have done in your past to be a hunter. Because a hunter is at the lowest end of the totem pole. He's not part of civilized society, a forest dweller, traditionally speaking, I'm saying, in a social context, in a caste context. This person is at the very bottom, not liked by the rest of society, dealing with dead bodies of animals, maybe selling their skins. This is the stuff that no one wants to do. And Narada Muni could have very easily said, the reason you are born like this is because of all the horrible karma you did in your previous lives. But he never says that. Nor does he look at the animals and say, they must have had some bad karma to suffer like this with broken bones. No. In both circumstances, the only side of karma that he applies is the first one, the main one. Karma means action. That's the literal meaning of the word. Reaction is a secondary side effect of action. But that's not the primary meaning. The primary meaning inspires us to act in this world. And when you take the idea of karma as action and combine that with the qualities of a Vaishnava, compassion, now you have the opportunity to do seva, to serve Krishna, and through Krishna, to serve all living entities. Then we have the opportunity to be Vaishnavas in this world in such a way that we are grounded in where we live. We are located in where we live, and we have the ability to give Krishna to everyone because we meet them where they're at. Just like Narada Muni did with Mrigari. So, a couple of then practical things. Okay, what can we do? First thing I want to say is that the idea of engagement is very broad. And I don't have the knowledge or expertise or capacity to think about how as devotees we should respond to all these different areas. There's some areas that overlap with the areas in which I work, such as environment and ecology, such as maybe to some degree AI, artificial intelligence, and the conversation surrounding AI and education and about who is a human being. Okay, these are some areas. But there's so many areas in which I have no knowledge or expertise. Engagement is something that we all do together. All we do is we ask ourselves, given who I am and what I'm doing anyway, how can I be a Vaishnav in this circumstance? Those 8 hours that you spend in a job or whatever, how can I be a Vaishnav here? How can I transform the situation? Oops, sorry. And so the first thing is we ask ourselves, think locally. What are the issues, the challenges in your community or in your profession? Sometimes a hurdle to engagement is we think, oh, the problems of the world are too big, right? I can't, I'm not in a position to broker peace in the Middle East. So what am I supposed to do? Yeah, okay, we can't do that. But we know our local challenges. One of the biggest challenges in Utah right now is the devastation, the evaporation of the Great Salt Lake. This is one of the largest saltwater bodies in the world. And we know in other places that once these saltwater bodies evaporate, then there's all this toxic minerals that have been deposited at the bottom over centuries, like arsenic and all kinds of different things. They blow up into the air and they pollute the air. And everyone breathes it and gets cancer and lung issues and respiratory things. This has been seen in other places where lakes, especially saltwater lakes, have dried up like this. Utah already has a really bad problem with air pollution, surprisingly. Pristine mountains, beautiful scenery, and some of the worst air in the nation. Why? Because those mountains block that air in. All our belching cars and everything, in winter, there's a thing called inversion, right, where the hot air is trapped below this cold air. And so that's already a problem, and then this Great Salt Lake is evaporating. And there's all these water issues and fights and so on. That's local. And as a devotee who is engaged in this type of educational work, it behooves me then to ask the question, how can I contribute? How can I help? And when people see a Vaishnav who is doing that kind of contribution, they think, wow, this is something to take seriously, this process. Tell me more. We held a conference at Utah State University called God and Smog. And it was held in this beautiful room. It was about this big, maybe a little larger, with panoramic windows looking out over the mountains that surround us. We live in a tight valley north of Salt Lake. Our pollution problem is not as bad as Salt Lake, but it's still concerning. And that day in particular, snow-capped peaks and beautiful views, and then this layer of smog that you could see just below the peaks. It was just ideal for that. And we had religious leaders and economic leaders, political leaders come together and talk about this problem. What is the relationship between our spiritual perspective and the state of the air around us? And one and all said, wow, there's such a clear connection, and yet we've never talked about this before. We've never recognized the fact that philosophy underlies action. That how we think, how we behave, how we see the world is going to affect how we treat it and what happens. That there's issues of greed and all kinds of other qualities that face this. So leaders from the LDS church, from other Christian churches, from Hindus and Buddhists and so on. But that's the point, right? We each have our areas locally in our own professions. We may not understand the world, but we understand our communities. We understand our profession. We understand what our company, what our group needs. And there's always a way to bring Krishna consciousness into that, to offer spiritual solutions to material problems. Well, I always do this. Okay. The next thing is, once you know what the problems are, then we have to educate ourselves. Who are the experts on this topic in our Vaishnav community? Because if we go in without the appropriate expertise and knowledge, then people just look at us as simplistic, simpletons, like, you don't really know what you're talking about. But like I said earlier, one of the beautiful things about our movement today is that we have devotees who are at the top of their fields in just about every profession, who are really good at what they do and who know the challenges and issues very well. Perhaps you're one of them. Perhaps you know your field very well. So who knows about this, the issues? And then study. What does our philosophy have to say about this? What does Bhagavatam have to say about this? One really fine example of this is, let me just finish the third one. And then we ask ourselves, then how can I help, right? That how do I start with small practical steps? As we speak up, even in small areas, and as we show good examples of simple living and high thinking, of farm communities and intentional, sustainable communities, the type of thing that Prabhupada started, and yet we're still working to get there. When we do those little steps to be part of the conversation, to bring people together, we start, like with anything, we get better at it, and our impact becomes greater as well. One very nice example of this, I think, is devotees in the United Kingdom who have created amazing inroads into the highest levels of government and education, who have a seat at every table when there's a law being debated, or there's a religious issue that's brought up, a religious freedom issue, or when there's environmental concerns. Devotees have a seat at the table. Sometimes because they're representatives of the temple. Other times because they are the experts in their field, and they're the right people to consult. Other times because they've built a community around them. They're cooperating with the right people. They have the right networks. But when we have a seat at the table, we have the ability to make an impact. A positive impact in the lives of people. And when people see that we're having a positive impact in their life, on the bottom line of their struggles, then they're ready to take our philosophy seriously. What's the number one thing you can do to convince someone to be a devotee? Help their children, right? Because that's what affects them every day. That's what they're concerned about. The same is true in every area. If we help people where they are at, they're ready to take our philosophy seriously. They see its value. The proof of the pudding is in the tasting. They see its quality. And they're like, whatever book that came from, I'm going to read it. I want to take it seriously. And then we can assist Srila Prabhupada in that vision he lays out in his preface. That this Srimad Bhagavatam becomes the resource book for the world's problems. That when people need creative solutions, they need a change in perspective, they're looking for higher solutions to their day-to-day problems, this is the book they turn to. They say, I want to read what's in there. What does your book, what does Bhagavatam have to say about it? And that's success for us. Thank you all very much for your attention. Thank you so much for your encouragement. I'll take time now for questions and discussion. Before I do that, I just want to say thank you so much for being an attentive and inquisitive audience. This is actually a very challenging topic. I know Mayavad philosophy is very complicated, but this is actually a lot more challenging for me because it stretches outside the specific realms of the philosophy and asks, how does this philosophy interact with the world? And so, I really, from the bottom of my heart, I really appreciate your willingness to listen, to think through it, to ask probing questions, and even for disagreements, because as we develop this, as we think about it in practical ways in our own times, it has to be a group effort. This can't be done alone by one person. It's not the type of thing you could write a book about and then it's done. Right? It's the type of thing that we learn from practice and we apply, and in this way continue the work of our sampradaya, the work that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, Srila Prabhupada began, and that we can continue. So I really do appreciate your giving me the space and tolerance to do this particular topic. So with this, yes, Prabhu.
Thank you for using your expertise to compile these important points and give them to us in a way that we can imbibe and utilize here. I think it's one of the reasons that the devotees resonate so much with your teachings, because it's substantive. It's thoughtful and substantive, and there's a way in which we get so much to take away. You've answered a lot of the questions that come up frequently while devotees are teaching and preaching to others, and maybe they're brought up casually and maybe the answer isn't complete. But when you take the time to systematically answer them, it's very satisfying for a community that's really oriented around outreach. I have a question, and it's related to the part about the personalizing the world. And I'm wondering where the teachers, was it the original teachers like Muhammad and Christ or those around them that seemingly set the stage for depersonalizing everything? I saw years ago in a horrifying vision of the Taliban blowing up any statues of Buddha that were left when they invaded, where was it, Tibet or something like that? Iraq. Where?
Yeah, Afghanistan.
Afghanistan. And meanwhile, being in public for so many years and presenting Krishna consciousness, it's one of the main points that people bring up. Or if they see Ratha Yatra, I notice that those with especially a Protestant background will recoil in horror that, wait a minute, that's exactly what we've been taught not to do. Bowing down in the middle of the street to either a deity or another human being or something like that. So what was it about those prophets and spiritual luminaries that made them or set the stage for this onslaught of depersonalizing everything and making sure there's no graven images anywhere of any kind?
Yeah, that's such a thoughtful question. Thank you so much, Prabhu. This is, in fact, if you look at the Bible, for example, the New Testament, then Jesus's push is very much towards personalization, where he's saying that your love for me will be seen by your love for the least amongst you. And the idea that when you give water to someone who's thirsty, you're actually giving water to him, right? So he very much encouraged that personalization idea. But there's another force that actually every spiritual teacher has to deal with, which is the tendency to, rather than personalize things and objects and human beings, that's the good part. The other side they have to deal with is to divinize things that shouldn't be divinized, right? So there's the personalization side, which is absolutely great and important. And then there's the divinization side, which is our tendency as human beings to take anything that is unusual or extraordinary or beautiful or wonderful and elevate it to the status of God, right? To make it great. In the Hindu tradition, this is done very frequently, this concern with idolatry. So idolatry is basically the name for improper divinization of things that are not supposed to be God, and yet we make them God. So this happens in the Hindu traditions with the idea of guru, where it's so easy to take a human being who shows some special capacity, elevate them to the status of a world teacher, and then that's not enough, so we elevate them to the status of avatar, right? And And so Prabhupada and all the Vaishnavacharyas push back strongly against that form of idolatry. Every culture will manifest idolatry in a different capacity. Some will do it by worshiping other minor gods in front of God himself. Others will do it through physical objects. We, in our contemporary American society, we do it by the idolatry we offer to fame and to wealth, right? The way we idolize people who are famous merely for the fact that they are famous, regardless of character or ability or whatever, just because, right? And similarly, we idolize wealth in a way that wealth gives you access to the truth, as if when you have money, then you are true and that is real. So every culture in every time has these two tendencies, depersonalization and divinization, or idolization maybe is the better word. And each acharya needs to fight against these two things in their own times and in their own ways. And so to fight depersonalization, they encourage us to personalize everyone and everything. To fight idolization, they encourage us to distinguish between what is God and what is not God. The challenge becomes, of course, then centuries later, where we take one and we make it a tool to destroy the other, right? So we can take the point about against idolatry and we use it as a tool to depersonalize everything we see. Don't make pictures, don't make faces, don't see anyone, and it's just God, it's just God. And similarly, we can take that the personalization side, and we can use it to destroy the difference between us and God by saying, because everything is personal, therefore everything is God, right? And anything you worship is fine, because there's no difference between God. Whoever you want to worship, whatever you want to worship, that's all God. So what we end up doing is taking one and using it to destroy the other, or using that one to destroy this. And in this way, we veer away from the two that these acharyas try to balance.
I just want to give a quick anecdote. Once I was going through Kennedy Airport in security, and I had a box with a Govardhan Shila and a Shalagram Shila in it. And when we went through the security, they were curious about what was in it. So they wanted to open it, and they did. And they asked me, what's in the box? And I said, these are sacred stones. And there were other people in the security line, and they kind of craned their necks. They didn't go on. They stopped, and there was a little crowd while they opened the box. And one of the guys in the group said, well, what makes it sacred? And I was thinking, like, this is a topic. But on the spot, I just said, well, that stone there is from the mountain where Krishna lifted it with his little finger for 7 days. And they went, oh. And everyone moved on. Anyway, it just kind of reminded me that people do have a tendency to want to know how things are personalized, but they just don't have the right framework to do it, which you just gave us today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, so yeah, I guess you're closer, so maybe there, and then we back, and then here.
Thank you, Prabhu, for such an elaborate topic. You put, like the first section, you mentioned the points, where I could not find the labels, which I'm thinking about over the course of my journey, but you put right labels. I thought these are the limitations. For example, Goswamis never talk about social order. So you have not spoken about that, about the social order from the Vaishnava perspective. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Can you just explain a little bit about what you mean by social order?
Basically, in your first session, you mentioned that one of the criticism comes is...
Oh, yes, social vision, yes.
Social vision, yeah.
Yes. So, very nice, thank you. A couple of things to point out there. One is that the basic language for social vision that we have is dharma. And I mentioned this earlier in my seminar, is that the establishment of dharma and what its foundations are is something that is of great concern to all our acharyas and all the commentators. One of Prabhupada's favorite verses to quote is Dharmam tu sakshat bhagavat pranitam, which is that dharma is originally given by the Lord, right? He is the ultimate giver of dharma. Now, what's interesting is that that verse is, as you may know, is spoken by Yamaraj, one of the great Mahajans. He speaks this verse to the Yamadutas. And it's coming as a counterpoint to a line that they say just before that in their speech, which is Vedo pranahito dharma, that dharma is laid out by the Vedas. And if you look at what the argument is about, they're saying, according to the Vedas, according to scripture and text, this man committed sinful activities and he needs to go to hell. That's what the Vedas outline. And Yamaraj is arguing against that. He's providing counterpoint by saying, yes, that's generally true, but you have missed the purpose of dharma, which is that dharma is meant to help us reestablish a relationship with the Lord. And this person, by calling upon the Lord, did that. And therefore, dharmam tu sakshat bhagavat pranitam. Dharma is laid out by Bhagavan. That's the classic argument between social structure as the defining feature of our life and the quality of our hearts in devotion to Krishna as the defining feature of our life. That's the classic argument between those who are purely ritualistic and those who are devotional. Between who was it in the biblical times? The Pharisees and the followers of Jesus, right? The question really is, what takes precedence? The quality of this person's heart or the rules that surround them? And the answer, of course, is always going to be somewhere in the middle. But Vaishnava acharyas throughout the centuries have argued this point repeatedly in their discussions of caste. That they have said, no, even as we may need to work within the structures of whatever societies we live in, we understand that there's a practical concern there. But that is not how a Vaishnava is to be judged. That is not how we see a Vaishnava, because a Vaishnav is known by the purity of their heart, Achyuta Gotra, and therefore they are of the family of Krishna, not of any particular caste. It's not by their birth. That has been said so many times by Vaishnava acharyas throughout the centuries in different ways, speaking to the structures of their time at that point. That's a social vision. It's a very powerful social vision. When Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was very practical, and he worked within the society in which he lived. And that meant that as a sannyasi, he typically took prasad at the houses of Brahmins, because that's where sannyasis were invited to eat. But you see how he provides an alternate social vision in his relationship to Haridas Thakur, where in that wonderful Leela where Haridas Thakur is dancing, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is dancing with the body of Haridas Thakur. That, from a social structure point of view, from a rules-based point of view, there's so much wrong with that scene. One, a sannyasi is never supposed to come in contact with someone who is an outcast. And a Muslim by his birth is an outcast. Number two, a sannyasi is not supposed to touch dead bodies. That's a polluting activity meant for the lowest outcasts. And I'm speaking for 16th, 15th century Bengal, right? Or India at the time. Right? This is the people who work in cremation grounds. They're at the bottom, very bottom of the social structure. So he's touching the body of someone he shouldn't be. He brings prasad to Haridas Thakur, which is something that a sannyasi should not be doing, not a Brahmin. And he's a Brahmin, Vishwambar Mishra, right? And then he's dancing with a dead body. None of those are appropriate for someone of the social stature of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And yet in that, he provides a social vision of what our relationship with Vaishnavas should be, right? Why Vaishnave Jati Buddhi, why to see the Jati of a Vaishnava is Naraki Buddhi, is hellish mentality, right? He's demonstrating that. Even as he works his way through, even as he uses the social structures that are current in his time in order to get his message out. So Vaishnavas throughout history have never entirely rejected the social structures of their time, nor have they accepted them. They've always used those structures and then undermined them. And Prabhupada calls this what does he call it? The logic of the python, yes. So there's a lot of it there. A lot of social vision is present. One might talk about also the Chandkazi episode as well, which is a wonderful example of so many principles we can draw from it. There's an article I've written on this topic. It's going to be published soon. But what are some principles of interreligious work as well as social engagement that we might draw from that? So there's many ways of answering that question, but the aspect of social structure, dharma, jati, comes to mind right away.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Okay, back there, and then we come here forward.
Hare Krishna, thanks Prabhu for the nice seminar. Each year we look forward the seminar that you're going to give. So regarding, I want to talk about point number 7, which is detachment. So regarding the, concept of, engagement when we are talking about. So detachment exactly, it means detachment from what, or what things, or what aspects. So I know you did mention a little bit about one at the end of point 7 when you're describing, which is detachment from, the fruits or results. And also you mentioned a little bit about retirement. I mean, not getting engaged when it's not required. Can you please explain a little bit more about that?
Yes, thank you. Detachment.
More probably on the community building or like engagement perspective.
Yes. So detachment in relation to engagement means different things for different ashramas. So for brahmachari, detachment means learning how to set aside my personal needs for the service of another, the service of the spiritual master, the service of the scriptures and spiritual knowledge, right? So a brahmachari practices detachment in a very physical way of how little can I live on and how much do I actually need to be happy and to survive. I remember in my teenage years, I did Rajamandal Parikrama, the 30-day walking one. At the time, it was very small. Today, it's now close to 1,000 devotees, but at the time, it was like 70, 80 devotees. And I remember for the first time, so the first time I did it, I was 11 and then 17. And the first time, it was shocking to me, having grown up in the United States, it was shocking to me to realize not only how little I could live off of, but how happy I could be with that little. Like, I actually genuinely enjoyed sleeping on the ground after the first week or two of adjustment, right? It took some time. And the biggest fight is with your mind. Like, the biggest fight on Rajamandal Parikrama is not with your body. The body hurts, yes, your feet hurt and all of that. But the biggest challenge is with your mind, saying, why do I have to do this? And why don't they get it right? Whoever they is, the managers, my fellow people who walk with me, and this person does, and you have nothing to focus on. accept the problems. And it was an amazing lesson. It was an amazing lesson. So anyway, so that's like for a brahmachari. For a grihastha, that sense of detachment is, how do I relinquish my sense of control in this world? Because this is the grihastha's biggest thing, is I'm in charge. I'm in charge of my house, I'm in charge of my family, I'm in charge of my money. And through the various ways in which we engage, by giving in charity, giving to others, right? We learn how to, I'm going to give my time, I'm going to give my money, I'm going to give my home for programs, I'm going to give my children to be devotees. And by that act of giving, and then also through some of the less positive ways of when in grihastha life you come to realize, even as you try to control, it's not, you can't. Right? No one's under your control. Not your family, not yourself, even your own body is not under your control. Right? And you come to realize, okay, I'm not the controller, Krishna is, right? I'm just the instrument here. In vanaprastha, then detachment is really about letting go. Letting go, love as letting go, right? There's many songs about this. Love means two things. At some points in life, it can mean holding on really tight. And for a grihastha, love means holding on, because that small child needs to be held, right? That's the only way it's going to know security and love and joy for the rest of their lives, is by someone holding on to them. But then there's a time when that same love is expressed by letting go. When we have to let go of our children, we have to let go of our wealth, we have to let go of our health, we have to let go of so many things, right? And we come to recognize that that letting go is actually an expression of love, of bhakti for Krishna and love for the people I care for. And that's detachment and engagement. And each one of those, at each step, each time we detach, it gives us space to engage. When the brahmachari detaches from physical needs, now that person can think, oh, okay, so what am I going to do with my time and resources? Let me engage in devotional service. When a grihastha lets go of control, now what am I going to use this house for? If it's not for me, let me engage. Who's going to eat all this food if it's not me? Right? If I can't digest it, then who is? And it creates space for engagement. And when a vanaprastha lets go, then it provides that vanaprastha an opportunity to now engage with a broader world, to share their experience by saying, now it's just not my child I want to teach. I want to teach the world now. I want to take this lifetime of experience that I've gotten, and I want to share it with people who are just beginning their journeys, who are starting off as grihasthas. And I've seen this with my parents in terms of their pivoting from running the family to giving to others. They're sharing their experience. And then, of course, sannyas is precisely taken just to create more space for engagement. That's Vaishnava sannyas, as opposed to Mayavad sannyas. In traditional Mayavad sannyas, the sannyasi will cut off their shikha, they will cut off their Brahman thread, and they will go to a cremation ground to symbolically do their own funeral. I have no connection to society. I don't exist anymore. And a Vaishnava sannyasi says, no, I keep the shikha, I keep the sacred thread, I just grow my family to make it bigger, to serve everyone. So in each ashram, detachment means something different, but in every case, that detachment creates space for engagement. Thank you. Okay, yes. Is there a switch?
I really loved how you elaborated the story of how Narada Muni approached the hunter. One particular aspect that stood out to me was how you described he stepped off the path. That sounds even scarier today, and I wanted to discuss this internal struggle that takes place when we step off the path to bridge a gap between us and potentially somebody else we're talking to, about polarizing subject matters, about subject matters where our philosophy might take a heavy stand. When we engage in such conversations, there's cultural aspects, there's societal aspects, there's philosophical aspects that might be very, very different. So how do we maintain chastity towards our principles as Vaishnavas, even though they might appear very harsh to the person or the community we might be speaking to, but at the same time empathize with them without seeming like we're bending our boundaries? So how do we maintain that sanctity?
Yeah, wonderful question. And we never want to give up our fidelity to our scriptures, toward our acharyas, towards Srila Prabhupada, right? That's the only thing that gives us strength to act in this world. Otherwise, what possibility do we have to help ourselves, let alone others, right? If we're not on that foundation, then we might as well be anyone else in the conversation. We can throw in our 2 cents and hope something good comes out of it. So that's our strength, right? Is Srimad Bhagavatam, these books, they are our strength. Our Srila Prabhupada is our strength. So giving that up is not a question. What we have to do is ask ourselves, what piece of that do I need to use here, right? What part of it does this person need to hear? And the challenge occurs when we sometimes try to give everything all at once, which actually we're not doing because even we don't have everything, right? We have a very small portion that we understand. And sometimes we need to ask ourselves, what piece of this does this person need to hear? So we can't water down, we can't change, we can't ignore, but we can choose how to package. And we can choose what element, what bite to give first. Right? What's the appetizer and what's the main course? Right? You have to feed them the full meal. But there might be something you want to start with, which is going to whet the appetite. And that's called the appetizer. And so that's what we have to ask ourselves, is what's that piece? And we gain practice, right? When we serve in a particular area, we get better at it over time. We can understand our audience so that we can really understand their needs. And we know when to be strong and when to be gentle and when to be, powerful and when to be humble. It's something that we can, that we develop through practice. When we see Prabhupada's dealings with people, it was incredible how at certain times he would just, he knew that this is a time where I have to give the truth in a way that's going to be a little strong, but this person is ready for it. They need to be shaken out of whatever situation they're in. And other times he would be the softest gentleman you could think of and just be so, smooth in terms of his approach. So with practice, we can develop that balance, that ability to present Krishna in the right way. That verse in Bhagavad Gita where Krishna says, "O Arjun, you declare it boldly to the world that my devotee never perishes." And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he says in his commentary that it is the job of the devotee to make Krishna look good. That's our duty, that's our job. That's why he tells Arjun, you declare it to the world, because he wants Arjun to make him look good. And Prabhupada says in Nectar of Devotion that this is why preaching is in the mode of friendship with Krishna. It's in Sakhya Bhav, because you're acting as Krishna's well-wisher. You're thinking, how will Krishna look good? How will people come to love Krishna? You like someone, you want other people to like them too. And that's the mood of friendship. Yeah? Okay. Here, and then here. And I'll try to be a little quicker. And then we go back. Sorry, I missed the corner.
Hare Krishna. Very enlightening and encouraging seminar, Prabhu. Thank you so much. One basic question, what do we mean by spiritual solution? The two examples that I got from the seminar, one was of the God and smog. There, the solution which might have come around is like greed and other qualities which are detrimental to the environment. And the other example of eco-farming or creating small villages, simplicity. Both these are like material solutions. What is so spiritual about it? So what is it spiritual solution we mean by?
Wonderful, wonderful. The only thing spiritual is the consciousness behind it. That's in the end, that's it, right? The only difference between material and spiritual is consciousness, is the mentality that goes in it. When we enter the activity of farming with a desire to serve Krishna, backgrounding my own desire for exploitation, that's spiritual. And when we go into the same activity with a desire to gain, to exploit, to use, that's material, right? In any kind of activity, that's the same thing. So there, for example, there are some devotees who are looking into how do we create investment vehicles. They're financiers, right? How do we create investment vehicles where we can invest in companies and in markets that are actually consistent with our values as devotees, more or less, right? So it's the consciousness behind it. The companies are still companies, right? They're profit driven. But the consciousness behind that initiative is a desire to serve Krishna, right? So ultimately, what makes it spiritual? Ultimately, what's the heart? It's chanting Hare Krishna, right? That's the heart of everything. That is spiritual consciousness. If that's the consciousness that feeds the work we do, then when a devotee enters a particular environment, it's easily visible to people who have at least a little mode of goodness. It's visible to them that there's something different here, right? And they can't quite put their finger on it. Perhaps our greatest experience has to do in the area of food, right? That when people eat prasad, they can't quite put their finger on what's different. Like, what spices did you put in? How did you cook it? And they'll ask all these questions. It's kind of like, well, I could give you the recipe, but that's not what's making this so amazing, right? It's the consciousness that feeds it. That's true about everything we do. You know, that's true of everything from fighting a war to programming a computer. It's the consciousness that goes into it that affects the outcome. And that's what makes it spiritual. Okay, yes, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. There are so many points which are worthy of contemplation and implementation. Prabhuji, one thing, when you said Lord is personal, so there was, you were saying that the Lord experiences the misery that the living entity goes through. So that was a little difficult for me to digest, because the living entity suffering itself is due to misidentification with the matter. But how does the Lord experiences the misery? If we can share some Shastric references on that.
Yes, I'm sorry, I wasn't clear about that point. Also, one of the devotees in the corner there asked me this question, Shastasar Prabhu, I think, asked me this question during the break. So let me clarify. Krishna does not experience our sufferings directly. That has two problems. One is it means that Krishna is covered by the three modes of material nature. And number two, it has the problem of impersonalism, because it means that there's no distinction between the living entity and the jiva. And so in his commentary to one verse in Srimad Bhagavatam, Jiva Goswami makes this very clear, that there are several steps between us and Krishna in terms of the experience of the living entities. So, not in a direct sense. The way Krishna experiences our suffering is the way that a mother or father experiences the suffering of a child. If you are a parent, perhaps you've experienced this. I have. If a child is suffering for some reason, maybe they got hurt or they're hungry, but especially when they get insulted, like they're hurt because someone left them out or someone said something cruel to them. Their pain at that moment, you feel it in your own heart. And it's not quite that you're feeling their pain, because you're not. You didn't experience it. You're not in their heart. But your great love for them means that in some cases, your suffering is worse than theirs. As in, they'll cry it out, and then they'll go off and play. And you're still hurting inside and thinking, boy, am I going to get even with that kid somehow, right? And no, I can't do that. Oh, this is a good learning lesson for them, right? You're still smarting from that pain, even if your child has gone on. So in some ways, it hurts you even more, right? And that's the way it is with Krishna as well. His deep empathy for the living entity, and particularly for his devotees, causes Krishna to feel our pain more than we feel it. Not because he's directly there in a material body and suffering, not because he's controlled by that pain, but as a result of that relationship of love. And Srila Sanatana Goswami says in his commentary to the Gopi Gita, he says, Krishna in the heart of the devotee feels that pain of the devotee. That intensity is there. Same thing Krishna is expressing in Bhagavad Gita, that this type of austerity causes suffering to the material body and the supersoul within. It's not a direct, controlled experience. It's an experience of empathy. Yeah, thank you. Yes, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. I had two takeaways from the class. I thought there was two aspects of engaging with the world. One can be described as learning what's right, where we spend time learning from Srimad Bhagavatam and our gurus and different acharyas, understand how we can engage with the world, with the audience in a meaningful way that actually addresses their need and also aligns with the Shastra. So that's one aspect. The other aspect I saw was unlearning what's wrong, in that we might have our own personal biases, our misconceptions, or mindsets even. I think you mentioned like staying in your lane or indifference, being indifferent as opposed to renounce.
Yes.
Detachment instead of detachment. So what can we do to focus on that second spot? How do we unlearn those misconceptions so we don't apply them, we don't propagate them when we go engage with the world?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Before I answer the second one, just on the first one, it's really a fact that if there's a bottom line to all my seminars, it's always comes back to that same point, that our Srimad Bhagavatam, our scriptures, have a wealth of knowledge that no matter how much we draw from, there's always more, right? It's a well that never stops giving water. And no matter what circumstances we're faced with, psychological, social, physical, humanitarian, personal, there's always more there. There's always answers in Srimad Bhagavatam, far beyond what we may think is there, right? So it's the gift that never stops giving. Now, the second thing on the point of how do we get ourselves out of that comfortable, our lane, right? One of the wonderful things about Krishna's engagement with us in the life of a devotee is that he always pushes us outside of our comfort zone. He'll give us opportunities that we are convinced we're not capable of doing. And then we do them. And if we do them, and we do them with some humility, and we do them with good advice, then we realize that we're capable of so much more in ways that we had never imagined. I've experienced this so many times in my life, but I've also seen this with so many others, and I've seen this with my own children, for example, and my own family members, is each time, it's easier to see it in others, actually. And in yourself, you can see it in hindsight. It's easier, not in the moment. You're kind of struggling with the situation and you're nervous. I can't do this, this is too much. But you see it with others and you see, well, this is so much of a struggle and I know this doesn't suit their nature or what they think is their nature. But Krishna knows our nature better than we do because he's right there in the heart, right? And he knows us better than we do. And he puts something out, and then if we act with the right consciousness, then Krishna does miracles through us. He does amazing things that we can never imagine that we would do ourselves. So those opportunities Krishna is going to send our way to be out of our comfort zone. That's not even our responsibility. Krishna will send those. Our responsibility is when those opportunities arrive to ask ourselves, what do I need to do to grab hold of this opportunity? How can I do it as a devotee? And the key element there, again, is that mood of service, is that consciousness. This is why we do our sadhana. This is why we do our japa, our chanting, so that when Krishna gives us those opportunities for service, if we come at it with that mood of chanting Hare Krishna with a pure heart, if we're chanting our 16 rounds nicely and we're doing it with sincerity, Krishna will do things with us that we could never imagine that he could do, that we could never imagine we could do, right? A flute cannot imagine the type of music that it will create. A piano cannot imagine the type of music it'll create. A hammer and a chisel cannot dream of the type of buildings that they can create. They can't, because they're just a hammer and they're just a chisel and they're just a flute, which is a bamboo stick with a hole in it, right? What can I do? Nothing. I used to be a reed growing on the bank of a river. I was a bamboo. I was a grass. Bamboo is basically grass. And yet, look at the magic that can emerge when it's ready to act as an instrument. Yeah? Okay, thank you. Okay. We should take one question from that corner because I've been ignoring that corner and I feel bad. But then we should conclude because we're 30 minutes over time. So, yes, please.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you so much for such a wonderful class. I was really appreciating the eight building blocks that you had presented us with. I think it was the sixth building block that you were talking about. Engagement begins with the transformation of character. And when we look in our shastras, even like the 26 qualities of a devotee, we see that a devotee is one who is a friend to all. And I was often confused with this idea because it's hard to be vulnerable with everybody you meet. But at the same time, if we try to be a friend to everybody, it can be inauthentic. And so when we bring that back to preaching, and if it is on a surface level, it comes off as inauthentic and not sincere. So I was wondering, how do we find those relationships and friendships that are authentic, and how can we also not be surface level?
Thank you. First of all, there's only one person who's the friend of all, and that's Krishna, right? He says, Surhridam sarva bhutanam, jnatva mam shantim richati. If we want peace in this world, then we need to recognize our own limitations, that I'm not the friend of everyone. And it's actually one of the more subtle challenges that we have to get over in our devotional service. How does the verse begin? Sarvaloka Maheshwaram. Bhoktaram Yagyatapasam, right? So we begin with Bhoktaram Yagyatapasam, that I'm the enjoyer of everything. And Krishna disabuses us of that notion pretty soon. Like he starts on it very early, that no, I'm not the enjoyer, right? My body's not letting me enjoy. My relationships are not letting me enjoy. That's not who I am. I'm not the enjoyer. And not even of the work that I do, I'm not the enjoyer. And I'm not the owner of everything, right? That we start learning also in the course of a lifetime. What's more difficult, a greater challenge, much more subtle, is this notion that I'm going to be a friend to all. And so often we tie ourselves into knots and stumble because we end up trying to be good to all. And what that translates often is not good to all, but loved by all. That desire for human validation and to be loved is so deeply ingrained in us that we want everyone to love us, right? So because of that, we're afraid to speak the truth. Because of that, we can't help those who actually need our help. We often act from the level of fear, because what will happen if? What will people think of me? And it devolves into this very insecure place, even as we try to love everyone, right? So we remember in Srimad Bhagavatam, it's described that one of Yudhishthira Maharaj's names is Ajata Shatru, he whose enemy was never born. And Prabhupada deals with this very specifically. He says, well, he had a lot of enemies, right? It's kind of the story. And yet he's called Ajata Shatru. Why? Because his purpose is not to harm any living entity, but to be their friend. But what that friendship means is different based on the person we're dealing with and our own capacity. And those are part of the difficult choices we need to make in life, is what does it mean to be a friend? Just like Prabhupada gives the example of embracing a tiger is not being friendly towards that tiger, right? That's not a wise way to be friendly. Keeping your distance and bowing from a distance is friendship when it comes to a tiger, right? So that's part of our learning process, is to recognize what is my capacity to help and what is this person's capacity to receive help. Because both of those will affect how we express friendship towards others. And that aspect of vulnerability we reserve for some people in our life. Because Krishna has the capacity to be vulnerable with everyone. This is why he's Akhila Rasamrita Murti. He's Akhila. Akhila means everyone. All relationships, he can be vulnerable in them. But we can't, right? We have to very carefully choose. Where do I want to? Dadati pratigirnati guhyamak. Where is that relationship of love? Where is the vulnerability going to be? And that's essentially what Rupa Goswami is asking us in Nectar of Instruction in that verse. Dadati pratigirnati. He's telling you, this is how you're vulnerable to people. When you give and receive gifts, when you eat their food and you feed them, and when you open your heart. And that vulnerability, you have to choose carefully as a devotee. Okay, it is past 12:30. Thank you all so much for your attention again today. I really, really appreciate your being us, and especially your wonderful questions and comments. They really did add so much to the seminar, and I will go back and I'll take notes based on what I've learned from you. It's always a pleasure. Tomorrow's seminar is not on this topic. It's on a different topic. If you're interested in the topic, please, you're welcome to come. It's specifically dealing with the editing of Srila Prabhupada's books, the process of editing that has gone on over many decades. And I've had the privilege of serving on a panel called the Editorial Review Panel for the past 4 years, where we've been going through every change made in Srila Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita. And not only has this been a topic of contention and controversy among some devotees, but also I think it's very useful for us to just know the amount of care and intention that goes into producing these wonderful books that we read, and what exactly is the behind-the-scenes process. So if that's something that interests you, then please, you're welcome to come tomorrow from 11 to 1. Usually my seminar stretches over 2 days, but this time I'm breaking it up into 2 different topics. So thank you again for your attention. Hare Krishna.
Radhika Raman Prabhu, we feel that you're part of our family here. And as I mentioned in the introduction, it really wouldn't be a complete year for us here without you visiting and imparting knowledge that is timeless. We keep notebooks, we talk about the points that you've made throughout the years, and it becomes part of our general conversation. It gets well used, everything you do. So there's nothing wasted as far as I can see in your approach here. We would like to invite you back, even if it's a year hence. We're putting in our reservation now. And we're deeply grateful that you consider our little out-of-the-way place here with, we're all grahastas for the most part, a lot of babies running around in diapers, but you still come here and give us this profound knowledge. Thank you very, very much. Hare Krishna. Dear Srila Prabhupada, dear Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Shri Shri Panchatattva, Shri Shri Gauranitai, Shri Shri Radha Madan Mohan, Shri Shri Lakshmi Nrsingadev, if you so desire, please let us take all these teachings from Radhika Raman Prabhu to heart and employ them for the good of the world and of ourselves. Thank you for considering our request. Om Tat Sat. Everyone who agrees with this prayer in whole or in part, please unmute and say Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Vanchakalpadurusha Kripasinave Vachapatitanam Pavanibhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah.
Hare Krishna.